In the early hours, the outskirts of Phoenix, Arizona, were touched by the dry desert breeze. Priscilla Wilson woke up before her 5:30 a.m. alarm buzzed. From the room next to hers, she could hear her husband Brian's calm breathing. While rinsing her face at the sink, she glanced at herself in the mirror. It had been 10 years since she began working as a physical therapist, and her bond with patients was still what brought her the most happiness. She remembered the joyful look of an older woman with shoulder issues who, after many sessions, could finally pick up her grandchild. She also thought about a young man who once struggled to walk after a crash and could now move around without needing a cane. Moments like these made Priscilla feel fulfilled. As she made coffee in the kitchen, she looked out over the familiar view of her neighborhood. She had lived in this home for 8 years since marrying Brian, and she got along well with the neighbors. Across the street lived the Millers, a retired teaching couple who often talked to her about the changing weather through their garden. On one side was the Rodriguez family, a pair with 3 young kids who sometimes dropped off home-cooked meals. On the other side lived Philip, a bachelor who worked in engineering and would sometimes join Brian for a barbecue. Priscilla had met Brian 10 years earlier at a friend's wedding. He worked as a foreman for a building company, and she was drawn to his honest and steady personality. His sun-darkened skin and strong build showed that he worked outdoors. Even after getting married, they built a relationship based on respect and supporting one another's goals. They had talked about starting a family early in the marriage, but chose to hold off until their jobs were more secure. Priscilla felt deeply satisfied with her job helping people heal, and Brian was steadily gaining more duties at his company. They also treasured the time they had alone, just the two of them. On weekends, they liked to visit shopping centers or watch movies. Brian preferred cowboy films, while Priscilla leaned toward love stories. They took turns picking movies, so both got what they enjoyed. Once in a while, they'd eat out in downtown Phoenix, but they mostly liked staying home. Money wasn't a problem. With Priscilla's income from the hospital and Brian's from construction, they were steadily paying off their house. The 3-bedroom place they had bought 5 years ago was roomy for the two of them and would be just right for kids if they ever had any. Their yard was neat. Brian mowed the lawn on weekends, and Priscilla took care of the flowers. Lately, they had begun sleeping in separate rooms, not because of problems between them but to allow each other better rest. Priscilla needed to be in bed by 9 p.m. for her early hospital shifts, and Brian's work hours were often unpredictable. Sometimes he got home quite late. As a modern couple, they respected each other's routines so they wouldn't disturb one another. To those around them, the Wilsons seemed like the perfect match. They hardly ever argued, and they were always kind to one another. Brian took care of fixing things and yard work, while Priscilla often gave health tips to the elderly in the area. Priscilla left for work at 6 a.m., driving about 20 minutes to reach the hospital. The therapy unit had 5 staff members, and she was trusted by many patients as someone experienced. She usually got back home around 3 p.m. and cooked dinner while waiting for Brian. This calm, steady way of life had been theirs for 8 years. They weren't worried about what was ahead. They felt they were moving forward together. Brian's job seemed secure, and he was likely to move up, while Priscilla had dreams of becoming the head of her department. Their life was peaceful and full of hope. But small things began to shift. Near the end of March, Priscilla noticed Brian looked more worn out than usual. While eating together, she spotted faint shadows under his eyes, and he seemed distracted at times. "How was your day?" she'd ask, and Brian would answer while rubbing his neck. "We're dealing with some tough job sites. A new building project started, and I've got more to handle now." Priscilla nodded, understanding. Over the years, she had learned how construction work could get more intense depending on the time of year or the economy. Spring usually brought new projects, which meant more duties for experienced team leaders like Brian. By April, Brian started arriving home even later. He used to be back by 6 p.m., but now was closer to 7 or 8. Priscilla would fix dinner and wait, but she was getting more calls from him letting her know he'd be late. "Sorry, the worksite is running over again. Go ahead and eat," he'd say, sounding tired. She could hear loud machines and voices in the background, proof of how busy it was. Priscilla understood and slowly got used to eating alone. Weekends were no longer the same. Before, They enjoyed slow Saturday mornings, catching up over breakfast. Lately, though, Brian spent much of the day in his home office, sorting through paperwork. "I need to look at the blueprints for this new project," he would say. "I've got a meeting coming up." Priscilla admired his dedication. She knew his job involved a lot of responsibility and keeping people safe. She wasn't surprised that he worked on weekends too. Still, she couldn't deny they were spending less time together. Their Sunday movie dates turned into watching DVDs at home, since Brian was often too tired to go out. Shopping trips became something Priscilla did by herself more and more. During the May holiday, Priscilla became more attentive to Brian's condition. He had clearly lost weight compared to before. Her husband's previously broad shoulders appeared slimmer. His appetite seemed to have decreased, and he often left the dinners Priscilla made unfinished. "You don't seem to have much of an appetite lately," Priscilla expressed with concern, and Brian offered a slight smile. "When I'm at the job site, lunchtime becomes irregular. The times I feel hungry vary." Why was he losing weight when construction work should be physically demanding? Priscilla pondered. As a physical therapist, she understood that stress could affect appetite. If he was assigned a project with heavy responsibilities, the mental pressure could be significant. Their conversations had also become less frequent. When Priscilla shared events from the hospital, Brian often seemed distracted. His gaze appeared distant, and she increasingly felt that his mind was elsewhere. Today, a patient who was discharged cried and said, "Thank you," Priscilla said cheerfully. But Brian only replied briefly, "Is that so? That's good." Previously, he would have asked detailed questions about the patient's recovery process and shown genuine interest in Priscilla's work. There were also changes in their nighttime routine. Priscilla continued to go to bed at 9 p.m. as usual, but sometimes when she woke up to use the bathroom during the night, she noticed a dim light coming from Brian's room. At first, she thought, maybe he can't sleep. With the physical demands of construction work and significant responsibilities, his nerves might be frayed, preventing restful sleep. As a physical therapist, Priscilla understood the impact stress could have on sleep. "Did you sleep well last night?" she would ask at breakfast, and Brian would reply while rubbing his eyes, "I had a bit of trouble falling asleep. I can't get the project off my mind." That explanation seemed reasonable. A site supervisor with an important construction project would have plenty on his mind. Subtle changes also appeared in the mornings. Brian began leaving home earlier than before. While construction sites generally started early, he was now leaving around 6:30 a.m. By the time Priscilla was preparing for work, she could already hear the front door closing. "You're leaving early again today," Priscilla would call out, and Brian would respond hurriedly while getting ready. "The new site requires me to leave early to avoid traffic. Sorry, but I don't have time to eat breakfast together." Priscilla understood that traffic congestion around Phoenix could be serious, and depending on the time, commutes could take longer. As a site supervisor, being late was not an option, so leaving early reflected his sense of responsibility. In June, these changes became more evident. Their time together had dwindled to a few hours on weekends, and even then, Brian appeared fatigued, with conversations becoming sparse. One Saturday evening, while talking with the Millers across the street in their yard, Mrs. Miller expressed concern. "We haven't seen much of Brian lately. Is he okay?" Priscilla explained, "He's been busy with work, leaving early and coming home late. He's been assigned a big project. The construction industry must be tough. But tell him to be careful not to neglect his health," Mrs. Miller advised kindly. Brian's change was noticeable enough that even the neighbors could see his diminished presence. They used to often see him mowing the lawn or doing yard work on weekends, but lately Priscilla had taken on these tasks alone more frequently. However, Priscilla didn't perceive this as particularly serious. Married life had its ups and downs, and it was normal for couple time to decrease when work was busy. The fact that Brian was assigned important projects likely indicated his high evaluation at the construction company. Instead, she felt proud of her husband's dedication. She believed supporting him was her role as a wife. Once this busy period passed, they would likely regain their previous couple time. Thinking positively, Priscilla continued her early morning commutes and spent fulfilling days aiding her patient's recovery. In the third week of June, a pivotal moment arrived. That night, Priscilla unexpectedly woke up around 2 a.m. She didn't know why, but felt as if something had awakened her. Her throat was dry, so she decided to go to the kitchen for water and slipped on her slippers to leave the bedroom. Walking down the hall, she noticed that no light was shining from Brian's room, which had often been illuminated even at night. But tonight, it was completely dark. After stopping by the bathroom, she casually glanced out the window and noticed something unusual in the parking area. Where there should normally be 2 cars parked side by side, there was only one. Brian's dark blue pickup truck was missing. What? Priscilla stared intently at the parking area. Even in the dim streetlight, there was clearly one empty space. Looking at the clock, it was 2:15 a.m. Where could Brian have gone at this hour? She hurried to knock on Brian's door. No response. Quietly opening the door, she found the bed empty and the comforter neatly arranged, as if no one had been sleeping there at all. Worry filled Priscilla's chest. Was it an emergency call from the job site? However, it was hard to imagine construction work happening at 2 a.m. Or had there been an accident, and he was called out urgently? If so, he should have informed her. Another thought crossed her mind. An affair during the difficult phase of their 8th year of marriage. Perhaps her husband was with another woman, sneaking out in the middle of the night to spend time with his lover. The recent changes in his behavior, fatigue, loss of appetite, and diminished conversation could all suggest signs of infidelity. Priscilla picked up her phone with trembling hands and called Brian. After several rings, it went to voicemail. She hesitated about leaving a message, but ultimately hung up without saying anything. Unable to sleep, Priscilla decided to sit on the living room sofa and wait for her husband's return. The clock hands moved to 3 o'clock, then 4 o'clock. Outside, the night was still, and Brian's car did not return. Around 4:30 a.m., headlights finally illuminated the parking area. Priscilla quickly got up from the sofa and peeked outside through a gap in the curtains. Brian's pickup truck was pulling into its usual spot. A few minutes later, she heard the front door quietly opening. Brian entered the house with great care to avoid making noise. Priscilla hid in the shadows of the hallway and observed her husband's behavior. Brian was dressed in work clothes, old jeans and a t-shirt reminiscent of those worn on construction sites, clothes that could get dirty. He carried a small bag in his hand and walked with slumped shoulders, appearing completely exhausted, as if he had just finished a long shift of physical labor. But construction sites do not operate in the middle of the night. What on earth had he been doing? Priscilla's mind was racing. Her husband quietly headed to the washroom, and she could hear the sound of him washing his hands. After that, he entered his room and closed the door. The next morning, Priscilla acted as if nothing had happened. While making breakfast, she observed Brian's demeanor. He looked more tired than usual, but there was nothing noticeably different about him. "Did you sleep well last night?" Priscilla asked casually, and Brian paused for a moment. "Yeah, fairly well," he replied vaguely. "What about you? You didn't wake from any noise, did you?" "No, I slept soundly," Priscilla lied. Her suspicion that her husband was also lying grew. That night, Priscilla intentionally decided to stay up late. She turned off the bedroom light and lay in bed pretending to sleep while listening carefully. Around 11 p.m., she heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Brian quietly heading toward the front door. Priscilla quickly got up from bed and looked out the window. She saw Brian heading toward the car in work clothes. He started the engine and left the parking lot with the headlights turned off, taking great care not to disturb the neighbors. "I knew it," Priscilla whispered softly. It wasn't just a coincidence from last night. Brian was regularly sneaking out in the middle of the night. The same pattern repeated the following night. He left home around 11 p.m. and returned around 4 a.m. It resembled the schedule of someone working night shifts, but night shifts in a construction company were hard to imagine. After observing for a week, a pattern emerged. Brian was going out in the middle of the night 4 or 5 times a week. She didn't know where he was going, but he wore work clothes and returned fatigued, as if he had been doing physical labor. Finally, she resolved to uncover the truth. The next time Brian left in the middle of the night, she would follow him. She prepared herself to catch him in the act of infidelity, believing that by discovering his lover's identity, she could gather material to decide their marital future. On Friday night, when Brian left home as usual, Priscilla quickly changed clothes and followed in her own car, maintaining a safe distance to keep track of him. They exited the residential area and entered a main road. Brian's car seemed to be heading toward a commercial district. Priscilla had anticipated him going to a lover's home in an apartment or a residential area, but the direction was unexpected. After driving for about 15 minutes, Brian entered the parking lot of a large supermarket called Megamart. It was a massive store that operated 24 hours a day, with customers coming and going even late at night. However, it seemed an unusual place for a meeting with a lover. Priscilla parked her car at a distance and watched Brian's movements. He parked in the employee-only section of the lot and went around to the back of the building, where the employee entrance was located. The scene she witnessed there completely contradicted Priscilla's expectations. Brian entered through the employee entrance along with several other men and women, all wearing work clothes and carrying cleaning supplies, like a night cleaning crew. No way, Priscilla gasped. Her husband wasn't meeting a lover. He was working as a cleaner. Why would a construction site supervisor be taking a night cleaning job at a supermarket? Yet, the reality before her eyes was undeniable. Brian was indeed working as part of the night cleaning staff at Megamart. The work clothes, fatigue, late-night departures, and early morning returns all matched the profile of a night worker. Priscilla sat stunned in her car. She felt embarrassed for suspecting infidelity, yet she couldn't grasp why her husband was taking up a cleaning job. Was he doing this as a side gig in addition to his construction work? If so, there should be no need to hide it. Various possibilities raced through her mind. Were they facing financial issues? Did he have debts, or was he unhappy with his salary at the construction company? However, their finances were stable, and there were no issues with mortgage payments. Brian's salary was expected to be secure as well. Around 4 a.m., the cleaning staff exited through the employee entrance. Brian was among them. With an exhausted expression, he exchanged pleasantries with other staff members as he walked toward his car. Priscilla returned home before Brian and went back to her bedroom as if nothing had happened. However, she couldn't sleep. The next morning, Brian had breakfast with his usual weary demeanor and mentioned, "I have materials to organize today," before heading to his study. But she could no longer trust his words. After Brian closed himself in his study, Priscilla resolved to take action. First, she called Megamart. Her heart raced as she spoke with a receptionist. "I'd like to inquire about night cleaning staff. Could you verify if someone named Brian Wilson is employed there?" After being placed on hold for a moment, the woman returned. "Yes, Mr. Wilson has been working with our night cleaning team for the past 4 months. Is there something you need?" 4 months ago. The timeline clicked into place in Priscilla's mind. Brian's behavior had started to shift around that same time. Fatigue, weight loss, changes in arrival times. All of it aligned with the night cleaning job. "No, I just wanted to confirm. Thank you." After hanging up, Priscilla moved on to her next action. She called the construction company where Brian was supposedly employed, Sun Desert Construction. When connected to human resources, Priscilla identified herself as his wife and requested to confirm her husband's employment status. "I'm sorry, but Mr. Wilson left the company at the end of March," the HR representative said calmly. His last day of work was March 28th. The voice on the other end felt distant. The end of March. That was 5 months ago. This meant that for the past 5 months, Brian had been pretending to go to work while actually being unemployed. What was the reason for his departure? Priscilla asked, her voice trembling. It was due to personnel reductions from project downsizing. Mr. Wilson did nothing wrong. It was a management decision. Priscilla thanked them and hung up. Her hands shook so much that it was hard to hold the phone. Her husband was unemployed. For 5 months, he had deceived her while pretending to go to construction sites every day. At night, he was working cleaning jobs to cover living expenses. She pulled out the household account books and examined them closely. The mortgage payments were indeed being deducted from Brian's account. Electricity, gas, and insurance premiums were also being paid under his name. Despite being unemployed, He continued contributing to household expenses. She also checked credit card statements. Gasoline expenses had risen, likely to maintain the pretense of commuting to a non-existent construction site. He had likely been passing time driving around. Fast food expenses had increased too. Since he couldn't eat lunch at home, he must have been dining out. Looking closely at bank statements revealed suspicious cash deposits. They were small amounts but regularly deposited, presumably wages from the cleaning job. Cleaning alone wouldn't yield an income comparable to a construction supervisor's salary. Priscilla began searching online for information about night cleaning wages in Phoenix. She discovered that cleaning jobs at large stores like Mega Mart paid about $12 to $15 per hour. Even working 4 or 5 nights a week for 5 hours each night, the monthly income would only be around $1,000 to $1,500, significantly less than a site supervisor's monthly salary of $5,000. Still, Brian had been contributing to household expenses. Where was he making up the difference? Was he withdrawing from savings, or did he have other side jobs? In the afternoon, Priscilla tried searching for Brian's name on the ride-sharing app, Uber. She found that a driver named Brian Wilson was registered. The profile photo was undoubtedly her husband. All the pieces fell into place. After being laid off from the construction company, Brian couldn't bring himself to tell her the truth and pretended to go to work every day. During the day, he drove for Uber, and at night, he worked cleaning jobs, striving to support their finances. Priscilla knocked on the study door. "Brian, I need to talk to you." "I'm busy right now," Brian replied. "This is important. Please come right away." There was an unusual firmness in Priscilla's voice. When Brian emerged from the study, he appeared pale. Seeing his wife's expression, he might have sensed something was wrong. They sat facing each other on the living room sofa. Priscilla took a deep breath before speaking. "You quit the construction company, didn't you?" Brian's face changed instantly, showing shock, confusion, and then resignation. After a long silence, he shook his head. "What are you talking about?" "I go to the job site every day." "I called Sun Desert Construction. They said you left at the end of March." Brian slumped, realizing he could no longer maintain the lie. "I also know about the night cleaning at Megamart. I followed you last night," Priscilla continued. "I also found your Uber driver registration." Brian buried his face in his hands. "How?" he whispered softly. "Why did you hide it?" Priscilla's voice was more sorrowful than angry. "Why did you carry this alone?" After a long silence, Brian slowly raised his face, tears in his eyes. "I was ashamed," he said, his voice trembling. "For 8 years of marriage, I thought I was protecting and supporting you. Yet, being laid off as a man, as a husband, felt pathetic." Priscilla listened quietly. "I didn't want to worry you. Your work as a physical therapist is going well, and patients appreciate you. Compared to that, Brian choked up. "I heard you were laid off due to project downsizing. You did nothing wrong, right?" "That's true, but the outcome is the same. I became unemployed." A nearly 40-year-old man losing his job. Brian stood and gazed out the window. "Initially, I looked for a new construction company, but everywhere was cutting staff and hiring very few. Even during interviews, I was often turned down because of my age or experience." "So, you took the cleaning and Uber jobs?" Priscilla asked. "I had to earn living expenses. I needed to cover the mortgage too. You bear no responsibility, but I couldn't bear to think our life would become difficult because of my unemployment." Brian turned to look at his wife. "Every morning, I left home pretending to go to construction sites. During the day, I searched for jobs or earned money driving for Uber. At night, I worked cleaning. Yet, it still didn't match my previous salary. Why didn't you talk to me honestly? We're married. We could have faced this together." Brian held his head again. "It was pride. As a man, as a husband, I thought I had to protect you, but really, I might have been the one needing protection from you." Priscilla stood and approached her husband. "You're working hard enough. Both cleaning and Uber are respectable jobs. Why should you feel ashamed of them?" At her words, Brian finally lost control of his emotions. In their 8 years of marriage, this was the first time She had seen him cry so much. "I'm sorry, Priscilla. I'm truly sorry for lying and deceiving you. But I just couldn't bring myself to tell you." Priscilla embraced her husband. "It's okay now. From now on, let's face things together. No more secrets." The burden he had carried alone for 5 months could finally be shared as a couple. A year has passed since that night. Life for the Wilson couple changed dramatically after that revelation. They began by honestly assessing their financial situation: Brian's income from cleaning and Uber, Priscilla's salary as a physical therapist, and their remaining savings. By making everything transparent, they rebuilt a realistic life plan. Priscilla increased her hours at the hospital and began taking on patient home rehabilitation visits on weekends. Her skills and experience as a physical therapist were highly valued, making it easy to earn additional income. Brian continued job hunting while maintaining his night cleaning and Uber work. 3 months later, a turning point came for Brian. Although the salary was lower than before, he secured a site supervisor position at another construction company. The new company was smaller, but it had a corporate culture that valued employees, and they appreciated Brian's experience and character. "I'm glad I was honest," Brian said on the evening he returned home after finishing his first day at the new job. "When I was asked about my unemployment during the interview, I was able to talk proudly about my cleaning and Uber work. They valued my sense of responsibility." Their relationship also deepened. Keeping their promise of no secrets, Brian began sharing daily events in detail. Priscilla, in turn, shared her interactions with patients at the hospital, making their conversations richer than before. "I still feel sorry about lying to you back then," Brian said quietly one evening after dinner. "But when you said we should get through it together instead of blaming me, you can't imagine how much that helped me." Priscilla smiled. "When we got married, we promised for better or for worse, didn't we? We truly fulfilled that promise in the real sense." They gradually regained financial stability. With Brian's new salary and Priscilla's increased income, they no longer worried about mortgage payments. They couldn't afford luxuries, but by working together, they managed to live comfortably. The change was noticeable to the neighbors as well. The Millers commented, "You two seem very happy lately." Philip remarked, "Brian looks brighter than before." Without secrets, Brian's demeanor had regained its natural brightness. Their weekends also changed. They increasingly went to see movies or enjoyed shopping as they had before. However, they became more mindful of their expenses, learning to distinguish between what they genuinely needed and what they merely wanted. This wasn't restrictive. Rather, it fostered a sense of collaboration towards shared goals. "I'm really glad I married you," Brian said while holding Priscilla's hand one quiet night. "When I was unemployed, I only considered my pride as a man. But what truly mattered was for us to support each other as a couple." Priscilla squeezed her husband's hand back. "We've grown stronger, haven't we? Because we've faced challenges together." She remembered the shock and confusion of that night a year ago when she uncovered her husband's secret, suspecting infidelity, being amazed by the truth, and ultimately deepening their marital bond. They learned that honesty was far more significant than pride, and that supporting each other, especially during tough times, was essential. Currently, Brian is enjoying fulfilling days at his new workplace, and Priscilla remains passionately dedicated to her role, aiding patients in their recovery. Financial worries have dissipated, and their trust in each other is stronger than ever. A true family is one that can overcome any obstacle together, Priscilla thought while watching the sunset over Phoenix. A new chapter in their relationship was just beginning.